All right. Welcome, Gabe Acevero, House of Delegates member from District 39, the only socialist in the Maryland legislature. Welcome. How you doing today?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Not too
Pretty
bad.
good weather we're having here.
Yeah. Nice and you canvassing in the rain, huh?
We go everywhere to spread the message of socialism, but also just, like to hear from folks, right? Always enjoy hearing from some folks. It's actually where I get some of my uh, great ideas. One of them was around guaranteed basic income, the kids aging out of foster care. I actually got that idea from constituent while door knocking who himself now an adult with a family was just sharing about his experience and just what kind of support he and other foster youth aging out of the foster care system need. And so from that I kind of got the idea for guaranteed basic income for kids aging out of our foster care. And that was in addition to just like the work we were doing around guarantee basic income, just for Marylanders, period, right? Direct cash assistance. So definitely a big fan of door knocking. Today's not the most ideal weather, but we had some pretty good conversations with folks on the doors, and I'm excited about the race and where we're at.
Cool. So I know you've worked on a bunch of things in the Maryland legislature. What's some of the other things you've worked on? So UBI is a big thing for you.
Police accountability.
Yeah.
Big on that, making sure that now I'm chair of a subcommittee of the appropriations committee that oversees the budget for criminal and juvenile justice agencies. Police accountability, public safety more generally, is something that I'm also interested in, but also healthcare, the Healthy Maryland Act. I've talked about that, and I'll just continue talking about it because Maryland really is the only state that if we wanted to pass single payer Medicare for all, I mean, we could do that, right? And we can not just set up a single payer Medicare for all system, but one that truly provides coverage for everyone, regardless of zip code, income, where you live in the state, who you love. We just want to make sure that people have the dignity and the right of something so important, so fundamental, so critical as healthcare. And so I'll continue to scream at the top of my voice for the Healthy Maryland Act because I think there's so much work that we need to do and there's so much potential to bring single payer Medicare for all. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Maryland is to the United States of America what Saskatchewan was to Canada. I'll explain that in the context of healthcare. Our fellow socialist, Bernie, tends to talk a good bit, tend to point to certain examples of, countries when talking about policy, whether it's from healthcare, housing, economic justice, etc. And every time he mentions healthcare, he's always talking about our neighbors to the north, Canada.
Yeah.
Canada has a, universal healthcare system. A lot of people think that that was something that sort of happened overnight, but also something that the federal government did, when in actuality that was not the case. Universal healthcare became a reality in Canada because one of its provinces, called Saskatchewan, its provincial legislature and government decided to pass universal healthcare,
Yep.
covering everyone, free at the point of use. It worked so well. Everybody else in Canada was like, well, why the hell do we not have this?
Yeah.
Right. And so it became, a point where the federal government of Canada could no longer ignore the success of this policy and its implementation in Saskatchewan, that they had to expand the policy. And so essentially what you have today is an expansion of an idea of policy that originated in Saskatchewan, the province of Saskatchewan in Canada. And that's why Canada has that healthcare system that it has today, that many of us point to as an example of what the United States could do if we were actually serious about putting people over profit, right?
Yeah.
In the United States, similarly, that effort can be a reality. And I think Maryland, I know Maryland is the state to not just, lead on this, but that can really implement a system that is an example, a model, an envy of the rest of the country. I know other states have tried to pass universal health care, Massachusetts, California, Vermont, etc. Few have been successful. Massachusetts has sort of a universal healthcare system, that is based off of all payer system mixed with, sort of private insurance, etc. and so on. They chose their own policy path, with respect to this issue. And so Maryland, we are unique in that we have an all-payer system where we essentially control what hospitals and healthcare providers can charge you for services provided. We control that.
Yeah.
So already that the fundamentals of that already exist, right? We control that.
We have a mechanism to keep the costs down already.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Unlike other states. And there are only 2 states in the US that have an all-payer system: Massachusetts and Maryland. Massachusetts chose their path in terms of where they were going to go on universal health care. Maryland has an opportunity, I believe, to go down a different path with the Healthy Maryland Act, which is legislation that I have introduced and will continue to introduce, because we have to push the conversation. We got to educate people as socialists, right? Healthcare in this country should not be something that I'm discussing, whether it's on your stream, whether it's in committee, whether it's at a town hall, whether it's people on the street. I mean, this should just be a given. And the fact that we're continuing to send billions of dollars in military equipment, billions of dollars in economic aid, financial aid to the apartheid state of Israel, while Israelis have free healthcare.
Yeah.
Most have free higher education. And so we're continuing to send billions of dollars to an apartheid government who is already guaranteed and providing these things that we're talking about, from healthcare to education, right?
Yeah.
So they can continue to fund wars and the oppression of Palestinians, the theft of land, the displacement, right? The ethnic cleansing, while we in this country, poor and working class Americans, cannot get a fair deal, the dignity of a quality education, and the right to quality and free, in my opinion, free universal healthcare at the point of use.
Yeah.
And so Maryland is really unique in that we can do this if we are serious. And so kudos to the then Democratic nominee for governor at the time in 2018, Ben Jealous, who ran and was supportive of single-payer Medicare for all.
Yeah.
Right. Shout out to the National Nurses United, one of the largest nurses union in our country that has been pushing for single-payer Medicare for all for the longest time.
Yeah.
And this is so critical because it is very easy for us as, those on the left to get caught up in this narrative or this rhetoric of universal healthcare, universal healthcare, universal healthcare. And I support universal healthcare, but we know that universal healthcare could mean different things. We can have universal healthcare where everyone has access to it, but there's still a profit or a private insurance part of the industry where, there's still the middleman, there's still a copay, there's still a deductible, there's still all these stuff, right?
Yeah. Are you familiar with the Michigan Senate race at all?
The U.S. Senate race?
Yeah, the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
So Mallory McMorrow, she made a statement to a crowd. If we had single payer, that means, first of all, she got single payer wrong. She said it would be the government running healthcare. And second, she was like, what if a Republican was in charge of it one day? And it was so silly and ridiculous. And she is somebody who uses, the reason you made me think of it is because you said universal healthcare. And sometimes I worry about that term too, but I also don't think people are buying it. Because another thing, she was all over the place. She tried to first say that going for Medicare for all at the national level would somehow preclude state action, which is just
but
really
this
silly.
Is the shit that pisses me off with corporate Democrats, because let's just call it for what it is, right? That's corporate Democrats.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But what pisses me off with corporate Democrats is that they will find every single excuse as to why we can't do something
Yes.
to the extent or to the have the type of a substantive policy that people want to see. They will always find an excuse why they can't do that. And then you see, Republicans and fascists, this, fascist president that would come in, and there is just no regard to all these bullshit, whether it's the Senate, Parliament, and this and who, and just no regard, just complete bulldozing to push through draconian and harmful policies that hurt people. And meanwhile, these popular policies and universal health care, Medicare for all, is very popular. The legalization of medical and recreational cannabis is popular, right? Ending foreign wars is popular, right? I think the only war, if you want to, just sort of play on words, that's popular in the United States and has been for some time, is a war on poverty. But no one outside of lip service, Democrats and Republicans, have really been committed to just taking on this fight against poverty, against, hunger, and against, just the income inequality in this country that exists. That is the kind of a war that I want to be conscripted to, a war on poverty and a war that really lifts up poor and working class people, and providing greater opportunities for people who, quite frankly, are closest to the pain but furthest from power. And so that's the shit that just really pisses me off with corporate Democrats. It's like, we need Medicare for all. Well, what about this and what about that? And the whole whataboutism, which is really tied up in this strategy of I'm going to make it sound impossible, as if there's so many barriers in the way of getting this done, so that you will think that it can be done. And therefore, it takes the pressure off of me, right? Of having to deal with, when are you going to support this or when are you going to do that, right? It's just so much bullshit. And but this is really, in some respects, where the Democratic Party is. It is a corporate party. There are corporate Democrats, and there will always be those who will center the interests of corporate interests versus people interests. Well,
what'd you think of Chris Rabb's win the other day in
Fantastic. I was talking to some friends about that. Happy to see also my good friend Summer Lee endorsed him.
Yeah.
I think that was amazing. Fuck APAC, just like fuck ICE, fuck APAC. This is an organization that the Department of Justice decades ago have, called for the registration of APAC as a foreign lobby,
right?
Because their interests really are that of a foreign government, foreign government that is engaging in apartheid, in ethnic cleansing, and all sorts of violations of humanitarian law. Chris Rabb's win was really the kind of victory that we needed to see, but we also need to see more of. And so I'm happy that he's there. I had the opportunity to meet him a couple of years ago at Black Cannabis Week that was in Philadelphia.
Nice.
Every year. Shout out, by the way, if for folks tuning in, Black Cannabis Week is held every year in Philadelphia. They talk policy, they talk industry, and I remember meeting Chris Rabb there because he came to not just participate but to listen, and I could tell that this was someone who was really committed to community and to people. And so I'm happy to see that he won. And I'm happy to see that he won in spite of APAC and its affiliates spending millions of dollars on all these other candidates to drown him out, to stop him from winning. He's won. And so we're going to have another working class, diverse, and pro-peace, right? Pro-peace and pro-Palestine candidate. Not candidate, but congressperson, in the U.S. Congress, because I'm going to claim it. I mean, I think it's a pretty blue district.
I don't even think a Republican's running.
No, I don't think so. So yeah, I mean, it's a short. So I'm really happy to see that. I know some people were talking about Thomas Massey, a Republican congressman, losing his election to didn't pay as much attention to that, but I know that he's been critical of some, not all, but some, because that's another thing too. A lot of corporate Democrats tend to, just bend over backwards when they see a Republican, deviating slightly from MAGA.
Yeah, but Massey's anti-Israel, so they don't like him that much either, I bet.
but Thomas Massey, yes, he's been critical of Trump.
Yeah.
On some things, but let's be real. This is someone who is still a conservative, still a Republican, still someone that supports some of Trump's policies. And yes, while not I agree with Thomas Massey. Thomas Massey agrees with me,
right,
on what the actions of Israel's apartheid government is doing is wrong, and it should be called out, and we should stop funding it. We should be focusing on home, right? We should be focusing on poor and working class people in this country. And so in that regard, there is agreement there. But, I'm not going to get into this whole, like, what you see some corporate Democrats, oh, you should run as an independent, you'll do, like, just stop this nonsense, right? Like, let's celebrate the victories of working class candidates and people who are not just pro-Palestine, but pro poor and working class people, pro LGBTQ plus, right? Pro people with disabilities, anti corporate influence, anti APAC, right? Anti-war. Those are the people that we should be celebrating and the wins that we should be celebrating. And I think I'm happy to see Chris Rabb winning, and I'm just not going to focus on any other kind of neoliberal, middle of the road kind of, oh, well, but look at this.
Right, yeah.
We saw that shit with Larry Hogan here in Maryland, right? Where, he would muster the courage to, like, criticize Trump here and there, and everybody's like, oh, some Democrats, some corporate Democrats are like, oh, look, and it's like, well, okay, I expect that.
He still ended the extra unemployment early for during COVID.
Yeah.
He still destroyed a public works project in Baltimore that was paid for just because.
Still wasted hundreds of millions of our tax dollars on defective testing kits, and then spent more millions trying to cover it up when we found out that it was a waste of money. Just completely incompetent.
Left a deficit.
Was just running a whole PR show while he was governor. You see that time and again how these more conservative blue dog or corporate Democrats are willing to just show up and to celebrate, these Republicans who deviate just slightly, right? Not all the way, but just slightly from MAGA. And they're like, oh, but then have, nothing but disdain and anger for progressives and leftists within our party. Like, that has always confused me. Like, even in my own race, right? I'm a socialist. I'm a proud democratic socialist. People know that. But, even within my district, right, and within this state, the establishment, there are some, in the establishment who are very critical of me, who don't like me. And not that I'm aspiring to be a darling of the establishment,
right?
But it's an example how, they would have all this disdain and criticism for people like me, but then willing to so quickly embrace, right, a Republican or a Republican endorsement, right, like a Liz Cheney and so others. Like it's really maddening to me.
Yeah, it's crazy. And Obama, I think a couple of weeks ago, was on Stephen Colbert going, I think the biggest problem is we need a strong opposition. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, are you just completely checked out? Like, yes. I just don't understand. Like, he is always so concerned about his legacy. Does he not see his legacy is completely shredded? I mean, Biden's is gone. Obama's is almost gone. So, like, I don't understand that it's not just Obama, but a bunch of, like, people who, like, I don't get what you have to gain out of like sticking with the status quo. For example, Sotomayor and Kagan. Every time you guys write a dissent, you're kind of consenting to the majority opinion. So, like, you can have all this angry dissent you want to from them taking voting rights away. But what you should really be doing is coming out and being like, yeah, the next Congress needs to tear apart this court because it is complete. Like, because what is it? What exactly is the message here? Increasingly, we're recognizing the court is political and that there are politicians in robes, and yet we're still acting like, yeah, but we have to follow what they say. It's like, what are we doing? What
Yeah,
are we doing?
it is they are still the judicial branch. And yeah, I mean, if we're talking rule of law, right? I mean, that's just how the system is set up. I do agree with you. I think
For instance, in
honestly,
Virginia, like just to give an
mhm,
example that I think is maybe even better, in Virginia, there was that 4-3 decision at the state level court
yeah,
that is so insane that I think that the executive branch should just ignore it. I don't think there would be that many repercussions for it. Ohio, they did it in Ohio. If they were Republicans, they'd just do it. And I just don't understand that kind of fealty. That's not rule of law. It's not rule of law when like the other side is actively saying we're using this rule of law to flout rule of law.
no,
Like,
I think where we're in agreement is that we seriously need judicial reform.
yeah, I call
Desperately need judicial reform.
I call it judicial reconstruction, but yeah.
I mean, hey, however you call it, what we need to ensure is that we have a Supreme Court that one is expanded from 9 justices of the Supreme Court, I think, to maybe 11 or 13. I think the court would benefit from the experience and the legal input of more people from across the profession. But I also think that the court needs term limits. I think this whole lifetime appointment is some bullshit. I don't think anyone should be in any job, all the way up to the point where, they're no longer able to physically do so, like up until they die. Like, I just don't think anyone should be in a position of power until they die, particularly in a position of power where you don't have a mandate, so to speak. You were not voted by the people. The Supreme Court is an unelected Supreme Court, right? And it is the highest court, of course. But it is also unelected, right? And I'm not, necessarily making an argument for an elected Supreme Court. But what I'm saying is that if we're going to have the structure that we have right now, then we need to ensure that we have an expanded court, and we need to have a court with term limits. So what we don't have is what we have right now, where, as you said, politicians in robes or, ideologues who are just coming onto the court, from, various right wing or, these elite legal, organizations and institutions that would sort of put up candidates for these positions. I think the court needs to be reformed in a way where it allows for more voices on the bench, but also that there are term limits, right? Whether that's 15 years, whether that's 17 years, whatever it is, we can have that discussion. Here in the state of Maryland, all judges must retire at the age of 70. All. That's just the law. I am not necessarily in favor of, like, capping people at, like, so I think, because the argument could be made that that's ageist. However, I do think that term limits allow for individuals to not just be in office, but be in office for a certain period of time where, look, we are grateful for your X amount of service. Now it is time for fresh, not just voices, but experience on the bench. And I think that needs to happen. That has to be a priority of Democrats if and when they win the next, next Congress, the House and the Senate. And it's not just the Supreme Court. I think the Supreme Court sort of ties into this much larger discussion of we need democratic reforms. I think what this election and what this second Trump administration is showing is not just that fascism is here, right? All this creeping fascism is here, but also how weak this so-called democracy or democratic project that we call the United States of America is.
Yes.
Right? It is very weak. And I think we can learn a lot from Brazil, quite frankly.
Yeah.
A country that has shown how democracy should work, how various branches of government should work, and how a check should work on one branch or the other of government. And the fact that they can have someone like Jair Bolsonaro, the quote unquote Trump of the tropics, someone who's took a lot of inspiration from this orange clown in the White House right now, who not only was
uncannily so, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad. It truly is.
Yeah.
It's like it's auditioning for this man's attention is really what he was doing.
Yeah.
But under his presidency, you saw indigenous rights and environmental degradation. You saw corporate profit and the elites get richer. You saw the poor get poorer or they got prison. You saw Brazil standing on the international stage fell. You saw an economy slump. And I think what we're seeing right now with the leftist leader Lula da Silva, who's the current president, he comes from a labor background. I would probably call him more of like a social democrat rather than a democratic socialist like us, but comes from a labor background, certainly a leftist, doing a lot of work of rebuilding the economy. What Brazil showed us was that their democracy and their constitution is strong, it is tight, and we can learn a lot from that. Trump has made several assaults on our constitution and our democracy, and not only have we not seen another branch of government like the Supreme Court or the courts really checking him in a way that exerts their power and provides confidence, but he's just engaging in blatant corruption right now, right? Just largesse, just fattening his pockets. I mean, it's maddening.
Well, yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was like, well, first with the Supreme Court, I agree, expanding it, but I would go a step further. I think Alito and Thomas belong in jail. If for nothing else, the corruption, and
madness, just blatant.
Yeah, just like, I mean, just getting lobbied by these CEOs nonstop, taking these trips with Nazis and shit, like Harlan Crow.
But again, this ties into what I was saying earlier. When Democrats retake the U.S. Congress, reforming our democracy has to be
number one priority.
Number one, or else all other things. And here's why this is important, right? Because this same Supreme Court that we are disgusted with and criticizing is the same Supreme Court that also delivered the Citizens United decision that essentially said corporations are people and they can spend unlimited amounts of money, right, to influence elections. And this is why we have so much special interest and dark money in our politics, and why running for president is a multi-billion-dollar project, and why billionaires and super PACs and corporations pay for access, right, not just to our president, but members of Congress, governors, state legislators, etc., because of this. And so we have to have public campaign finance reform, publicly funded elections. I think that is how we deal with dark money and really raise the voice and the power of the American people in their government.
Well-paid legislators.
I completely agree. Not just at the federal level, but at the state level as well. There are some states where legislators are making $15,000 annually, and in the case of New Mexico, state legislators are making $0.
Yeah.
So when we do these things, we essentially tell the elites, the money and privilege and so on, that this is a position and a place for you, and poor and working class people who are catching hell, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, right? They can't run for those positions. So in addition to the policies not being in our favor, people like us from the working class, from the proletariat, we're not in these rooms. Right. We're not in these positions, right?
Definitely.
So I completely agree with you, right? But we need public campaign finance reform. We need voting rights strengthened, right? We got to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. This Congress has to do it. We need to see reform of judiciary. We need to also see reform in terms of redistricting,
Yeah,
because every
gerrymandering.
10 years, right, state legislatures redistrict. And so I think the federal government needs to act on that, right?
I
mean,
think
there's
they
so
need
much.
to act on state legislature gerrymandering as well.
Yeah.
I don't think like this like that's one place. I mean, I don't like
Yeah.
federalism at all. It's just BS. But like, I mean, in North Carolina, where they've had a veto-proof legislature of
Yeah.
Republicans, even though a Democrat wins every
Yeah.
time. All right, I understand. You got to get going. Thank you so much for coming on, and
No,
we'll have
absolutely.
you on.
I mean, this is glad we could have like a 30-some minute rundown of just, rant of how, things are. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how else to say this. Like, even in times where we see like fascism on the rise, it has always coincided in some respects with the rise of the left and socialism, and a lot of awakening of the populace, the population, the working class. And I think there's a lot of bright light in all of this, that there are socialists that are organizing, DSA is organizing, we're organizing, and we're running, and we're doing so for a better future. And I think it's totally possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let me get
All
out
right.
of here.
Yeah. Have a good one. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Of course, man. You're
Yeah.
right down the street.
Yeah, we'll have you on again soon.